Hello, I'm Timothy Schmalz, and I welcome you to my podcast series, When in Rome, Touch the Art. Here we'll get to know my sculptures installed in Rome, their history, and their meaning. In this episode, I introduce my sculpture, When I Was Hungry and Thirsty. The first sculpture I created in Rome, I think it was in 2006, is When I Was Hungry and Thirsty. The sculpture, installed steps away from St. Peter's Square, is installed at the entrance of the oldest hospital in the world. This is the first sculpture that I installed in Rome, and it really meant a lot to me. I remember the meeting with the hospital. I didn't speak a word of Italian and they didn't speak any English, but I showed them a picture of the clay sculpture of this, and immediately we were on the same wavelength. They understood the message. They were so excited. They had decided to install the sculpture here right beside their sign. It's fascinating because Santo Spirito, I did some research, and when Martin Luther came to Rome, this hospital was one of the few things that he thought was absolutely a great location, and he was so proud and he was so impressed by what they were doing here at Santo Spirito. And that's Martin Luther. The history here is just absolutely phenomenal. To have this sculpture, When I Was Hungry and Thirsty, this, I do believe I did it in the year 2006. That's 20 years ago. And I didn't know what I was creating. It was at the time I actually got some clay ready on Good Friday. I got a huge amount of clay. And by 4 days later, 3 or 4 days later, the sculpture was born. And I was really impressed at how, if I just, in a sense, become an instrument of God's peace and have that mindset, that beautiful things can come out of sculpture. And so the first location is here, but now the sculpture is really being placed all around the world. Just last year, the sculpture was installed at the Baclaran Church in the Philippines. It's been installed in so many different places. New York City at St. Francis of Assisi Church installed one soon after this. But for me to have this sculpture here, where we're right across from the Tiber River, we are at a historical spot where it became really clear with the Catholic Church that we have to take care and minister to the poor and actually take care of the least in our community. It was, to have the sculpture installed here is just absolutely phenomenal. Years later, I came to Rome, and Dr. Guido Inverness, who was one of the people that helped install the sculpture, saw me getting an espresso very close by here. And he thanked me and he said, "You wouldn't believe how many people put coins here, that they take the coins and they give it to the charities." One person, actually a priest, was in line at the cafe, and he said, "You did that sculpture." He said, "I thought that sculpture was 500 years old." And I said, "That's the best compliment that this sculpture got." In a sense, I love the fact that here in the Eternal City, new pieces of sculpture are being installed and created. There's a layer of meaning to that this is not a museum. The Eternal City here is not a museum, but it's a growing place of spiritual faith. And so by adding these pieces to this beautiful historical library, kind of proves and it shows that there are so many ways that we can evangelize, that we can express ourselves now with artwork. And so, yeah, it was an amazing experience. This piece was also on exhibition in America at different churches. And one priest came and said, "In order to see the face of Jesus, you have to get on your hands and knees." And I thought, oh, that sounds so good. If it sounds good, it really is kind of because of the meaning behind it. Jesus here is humble. A lot of the representations of Jesus that we've seen throughout the centuries have him as Christ the King, gilded, perfect abs, perfect Jesus. This one here is probably, I think, one of the most humble representations of Jesus here within the Eternal City. It's Jesus sitting cross-legged in a corner where most homeless people you would find would be in that position. And I love the idea of the cup and the plate. It suggests the Holy Eucharist, but it also suggests the real need of hunger and thirst that's within our community. When I first came here, I was amazed at the site. If you look across the street, you see the history of Rome. You see the Tiber River, you see Casa d'Angelo. And to have this sculpture here, I think, to me, at that age, in my 20s, really gave me that confidence to actually create more. It showed me that there's no limit, in a sense, to the amount of creation that you can create when you're dealing with the eternal subject. I learned with this sculpture that you need a great subject matter to do a great piece of artwork. In fact, a sculpture should only and clearly reflect the scripture and nothing more. I wasn't really cared about the detail, the polishing up. You can see the sculpture's done really rough. And what actually happens then is you see the subject, the rawness of the subject matter, and you don't get distracted by any little ringlets or details. And so I'm very happy. I'm very happy. Oftentimes, what we do have with the installation on my sculptures is the scripture in the different languages, so people can read that verse and then make that connection. And so, in a sense, it's bringing the Bible to the streets. It's opening up a Bible that oftentimes in our modern day is closed, and opening it up, and in a glance, in one moment, with one look, you can read that scripture. And that's my job, and that's a challenging job, to try to visually translate the Bible so it's accessible to people. The sculpture was a success, I believe, and my hope is that it is installed in many different places. Right now I'm installing it in Bethlehem, and so I'm very happy about having it at another very historical place in the world. Oftentimes I feel that scripture represents or warrants more than one sculpture. But similarly, I believe that some places warrant more than one sculpture. So here I take the two sculptures from Matthew 25, bring them together. And in a sense, they tell a story that helping the poor, feeding the hungry, giving the drink to the thirsty is very much similar to visiting the poor. These ideas are together. They're very important. And in a sense, it's the same idea expressed in different ways. And that is having compassion for the vulnerable in our society. Oftentimes, I think if Martin Luther, when he came to Rome, would have seen this sculpture, how he would have interpreted it, how he would have reacted to it. And I think Martin Luther would have liked the sculpture. I think that he would have very much appreciated it. This sculpture was, in a sense, the reason why I created the homeless Jesus. I wanted, again, to represent more. I wanted to give more to Matthew 25. I wanted people to see more. And so by creating other sculptures on this theme, just seemed natural to me. If my job is, in a sense, being an artistic soldier for the Catholic Church, there's no end to the amount of energy I should be pushing towards this. Oftentimes, I think there should be more artists that are doing work that celebrates and promotes Christ, that promotes the Gospels. And hopefully these pieces will in the future inspire other artists to actually pick up that Bible, open it up, and interpret, express, and translate some of these key areas. There's no way I'll be able to express a fraction of what needs to be there's no way I will be able to, in my short life, express, translate everything that needs to be in our faith. I just created 2 sculptures with Carlo Acutis. Our church continues to create new saints. New saints allows new opportunities for new artistic expression. It's amazing. And it's not meant to be on a pedestal. It's not meant to be the center of attraction. So many people walk by here year after year, month after month, and only after the second month do they actually notice it And I love that about it. I love the slow reveal of sculptures, that they become part of the environment. And then you learn or you discover them. And it's almost like the Bible is opened up and there's little bookmarks in it that people can examine and detail and investigate in a closer way. So this sculpture here is the perfect example of that. The flexibility, the way you can install it, the way it fits within an environment, I think is absolutely beautiful. The idea of having the figure cloaked also, what I find, gives it that mysterious quality, that spiritual mystery. Also, it can look like anyone. You can't see the face of Jesus until you get down and look up, but you certainly can see the outreached hand with a wound on it. And this is something that, in a sense, is very discreet. You discover it. I love that about sculpture. And I think that with sculpture, better than painting, you put it outside. You don't have to go inside to see it. And that means it becomes more a part of that city. It becomes part of that community in a way that only sculpture can really, really achieve. A lot of the people walking by don't even notice it. I love that. Some people notice it, think it's been here for 500 years. One of the most, I think, phenomenal things about this sculpture was when it was installed in Atlanta, Georgia, at the unveiling of it with Cardinal Gregory. A homeless person came up to talk about his experience being homeless, and it moved him so much to see Jesus represented a lot like him. And I could often imagine that some of the marginalized people in our community feel that Christianity, Jesus, the saints are way up here and they're down here. And that's not the case. It's interesting. Oftentimes I think about the Matthew 25 series and think, what would Jesus think? Would he like this sculpture? And I think, yeah, he probably would like it a lot more than the perfect Jesus being represented. The Jesus with the abs and the biceps and the perfect teeth. Because this is very much authentic to what he said, how he described himself in his words. When he said that whenever you fed the least, you are feeding me. I think that's very powerful. And so I think that this is something that is very consistent with the teachings of Jesus himself. And that's I think, phenomenal to actually have sculptures that reflect the Bible today being created, being installed all around the world now. And like I oftentimes think that we need today to actually use as many tools as possible to get the word out, to get the gospels out. And this is another, a very powerful way. It's silent, but it's loud. I love it. I remember when ointment was poured on Jesus's feet, there was a complaint. That money could have been given to the poor. And it's interesting. Here I created a sculpture out of bronze that celebrates and brings attention to the idea of the poor. And oftentimes I think that creating a sculpture is like pouring ointment on the feet of Christ. And we need to have that visual awareness, I think, of Jesus and the idea of helping the poor in a way that's not invisible. So many people give to food shelters. I know so many great people, and I know the Catholic Church does so much to help the poor, but it goes unnoticed in communities, in countries. But this really showcases what goes on behind the church that oftentimes they don't express and no one hears about. There's so many people that are supported by the charities. This sculpture brings that into focus. In a sense, commemorates that virtue of helping the poor. Now, I did this sculpture around more than 20 years ago. And I think it's only with Christian sculpture that I have the energy and the drive to actually continue to create. And oftentimes, I think that you need a great subject matter to do a great sculpture. And for me, the Bible, the saints, they're a never-ending well of opportunities to create. There's so many eternal truths that I believe need to surface, that need to be brought out, that need to be put out so people can see them. And early on in my career, during the time I was doing this, I really felt that, like St. Francis of Assisi said, that you are an instrument of God's peace. And I thought that as long as I have these eternal subjects to work with, I will have absolute energy, absolute excitement to give form and to bring them to life. And so it really is fascinating that even today, when I come back after I'm in Rome, I'll be back in my studio finding new expressions for this. But if you look at the whole history of artwork, 90% of it's Christian. It always had its seat within the church in Western culture. Good Friday, I started it, and it was done 2 or 3 days after that. People came back into the studio, and they were amazed. The only thing I realized is I wanted to do a representation of Jesus that was the most humble representation of Jesus. Initially, I thought I would do a Jesus on the cross, but I thought, you're going to look up. You want to look down if it's humble. And then so I started to sculpt on the floor of my studio, this piece. And I was amazed. I was amazed that it formed itself in 3 days. And I was so quick, and it was in a sense so spontaneous to create this piece, but it all fell together, and it was the start of something absolutely beautiful. For me, it taught me not to be so intellectual of sculpture. Start with the idea of a humble representation of Jesus and see where it takes. Oftentimes, if you sit in your desk and do sketch after sketch, that narrows and narrows your ideas. Sometimes you just have to have faith, get a piece of clay, start forming it, and see where it leads. And you could say that whole process is spiritual. And to me, creating this piece was indeed a spiritual process. I'm also very sensitive that what I do will be there for a long time. So it better be good. It better be authentic, and it better be pointing to something that is from the scriptures, that celebrates the saints, celebrates the gospels, because it's going to be here taking up space. It better serve a great purpose. When I actually installed this piece, I was brought up to the library in the historical part of the hospital, and they asked me to sign this book, which was signed by many people that have contributed to the hospital, including Pope John Paul II. His signature was in the same book. And in the library inside here, in the historical area, you have a fresco of the Pope, the current Pope, when this hospital was founded, receiving a basket of dead babies. And part of the history of the hospital was the poor women in Rome brought to the feet of the Pope baskets of blue dead babies and dropped them on his feet, making him aware of the situation that poor women could not take care of their babies. So they would throw them in the Tiber River right across the street. And at that moment, the Pope, the Catholic Church, decided to make a place. I don't even think they called it a hospital at that point in time. Make a place to take care of the sick, take care of the poor. And that's the beginning of this hospital. The history is just absolutely amazing. This is where the idea formed with the Catholic Church that it is our spiritual duty to take care of the marginalized, the poor, and the sick within our community. Prior to that, the pagans, again, had this idea that if you were sick, if you were poor, that's your problem, tough luck. Or even worse, that you're cursed by some god, and we're not, so good luck to you. And so the major shift in our Western culture, that is a universal idea that we have to take care of our brothers and sisters, developed right here at the banks of the Tiber River, which is fascinating. And now this sculpture here is that symbolic testament of that belief.
So far, today's chapter of When in Rome, Touch the Art by Timothy Schmalz. Thank you for joining me this far. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. Meanwhile, follow me on my social media.
Thanks to the Hospital of Santo Espiritu. When in Rome, Touch the Art is a production by Lamachi Communication for Good Causes. Executive producer, Juan de la Torre. Voiceover, Timothy Schmalz. Camera, Lorenzo Mejia. Editor, Mauricio Ramirez. Design, Mauricio Ramirez. Sound, Lorenzo Mejia.